Hey guys, so for a long time now, I've wanted to explore what a biblical theology of worship is, and that's what I'm going to attempt to answer in this video. Now, for full disclosure, I'm basically reading off an article called What is a Biblical Theology of Worship from the website called gotquestions.org, and I will be sharing the link to that article in the description of the video below. But let's answer that. What is a biblical theology of worship? A theology of worship is a doctrine concerning the worship of God. A biblical theology of worship bases its teaching on what the Bible alone says. Just as the biblical understanding of salvation is based on the Bible's overall teaching concerning salvation, a biblical theology of worship is based on the Bible's overall teaching concerning the worship and adoration of God. Having a biblical theology of worship is important. Not everything that is called worship is actually worship, which is a lesson that we learn in the very beginning. Look at the sacrifices both Cain and Abel brought to the Lord. The Lord looked on favor at Abel's offering, but Cain, the Lord did not look on with favor. In Genesis 4:4-5. Now, what was Cain's problem besides jealousy, stubbornness, and murderous rage? Cain lacked a proper theology of worship. Cain brought an unacceptable sacrifice to the Lord and demanded that the Lord be pleased. The church that does not operate under the biblical theology of worship is in danger of failing to give God glory and failing to offer worship that is pleasing to Him, which is why I wanted to do this video, why it's so important to me to do this video. Worship is as misunderstood a doctrine as any other within the church. Contrary to popular belief, worship does not begin and end with the singing portion of our church services. Worship is also not limited to bowing in reverence before God. To begin with, worship is determined by God Himself, not by our sincerity, pious feelings, or musical skills. Hebrews 12:28 says, "We must serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear." The Greek word translated serve here is a form of a Greek word for worship, which is used 21 times in the New Testament in the context of service and worship. Another form of the word worship is the Greek word therapeo, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong, from which we get the English word therapy, and this is most often translated heal, in reference to the healing of others. In the New Testament, the word is used many times, especially in passages involving the healings that Jesus performed. Other Greek words translated to mean worship are, and again I apologize if I'm pronouncing these wrong, proskunuo, which means paying homage, and that's used in 1 Corinthians 14:25, sebazomai, which again, sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, which means to render religious honor in Romans 1:25, and sebomai, meaning to revere or adore, which is used in Acts 16:14. We see a form of the word sebomai used by Jesus in reference to vain, hypocritical worship of God in Matthew 15:9, which implies that sometimes what we call worship of God is something else entirely. A biblical theology of worship is concerned with the true worship of God. True biblical worship must be reverent. In Hebrews 12:28, we see that. We must understand who is being worshipped. And when we worship a God who is holy, who is just, who is perfect, who is powerful, who is loving. We are sinners saved by grace, coming before a holy God on the basis of our Redeemer. Therefore, there is no room for pride in adoration, as we see in Luke 18:9-14. Also, worship must be in truth. That is, our worship must be properly informed, as we see in John 4:24. Otherwise, unless we have accurate knowledge of the God we worship, there is no worshiping in truth. Those who wish to worship biblically must worship God as He is revealed in Scripture. Unbiblical views of God must be rejected if we are to worship. A biblical theology of worship recognizes that worship involves more than externals. God sees the heart, In Isaiah 29:13 it reads, "These people come, honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is based on merely human rules they have been taught." Worship is not about ritual or artistry, although ritual and art can be valid expressions of worship. Worship is not about expressing ourselves, although David's dancing before the Lord with all of his might was an act of true and pure worship in 2 Samuel 6:14. Worship is not about music even, although music is often used by worshipers. True worship is about God. True worship is about the reverence and honor and adoration of Him, not simply because of what He does for us, but because of who He is. A biblical theology of worship will result in worship that produces a change of heart. The worshiper will have an even greater desire to love and obey the Lord as a result of true worship. Worship and service go hand in hand. Worship of God should propel us into greater obedience, which is exactly what Jesus said in John 14:15. If we say we love and worship Him but do not obey Him, our worship is worthless. A biblical theology of worship leads to the conviction that worship is a lifestyle, not a moment in time, as we see in 1 Corinthians 10:31. Our lives are to be dedicated to the worship and service of God, and worship is to be more than a temporary experience-oriented activity on Sunday, after which we revert to a normal life the rest of the week. True worship is constant, inner praise to the God of Scripture, expressed in prayer, in song, in art, in service, in giving, and in our very lives.